Proposition 37, Genetically Engineered Foods, Labeling Initiative Statute. Plain language, require the labeling of genetically engineered foods. I understand that most people don't really understand the full extent of genetic engineering, and frankly, it's an experiment that continues to evolve, and nobody really knows where it will lead or what the consequences of genetically engineering foods will be. So rather than launching into an extensive lecture on the subject, I'll just read the blurb that the California General Election Voters Guide included for some background. Genetic engineering is the process of changing the genetic material of a living organism to produce some desired change in that organism's characteristics. This process is often used to develop new plant and animal varieties that are later used as sources of food, referred to as genetically engineered foods. For example, genetic engineering is often used to improve a plant's resistance to pests or to allow a plant to withstand the use of pesticides. Some of the most commonly genetically engineered crops include varieties of corn and soybeans. In 2011, 88% of all corn and 94% of all soybeans produced in the U.S. were grown from genetically engineered seeds. Other common genetically engineered crops include alfalfa, canola, cotton, papaya, sugar beets, and zucchini. In addition, genetically engineered crops are used to make food ingredients, such as high fructose corn syrup, that are often included in processed foods, meaning foods that are not raw agricultural crops. According to some estimates, 40 to 70% of food products sold in grocery stores in California contain some genetically engineered ingredients. For the record, it is currently legal for a supplier to sell genetically engineered foods without disclosing that the food has been genetically engineered. What does it do? Prop 37 requires that a label be placed on any foods being sold at stores that are made from genetically engineered plants or animals, and requires the Department of Public Health to regulate the labeling of such foods. It makes it illegal to advertise genetically engineered foods as natural, naturally made, or naturally grown, etc. Prop 37 allows individuals to sue manufacturers who fail to properly label genetically engineered foods, and it makes retailers, such as grocery stores, responsible for complying with the new laws. There are some exceptions to this law. Foods do not have to be labeled as genetically modified if the food is certified organic, unintentionally produced with genetically engineered materials, made from animals that are fed or injected with genetically engineered material but are not genetically engineered themselves, prepared with only small amounts of genetically engineered ingredients, an alcoholic beverage, being sold for immediate consumption, like in a restaurant, and a label is also not required if the genetic modification was used to treat a medical condition. Fiscal impact. The legislative analyst estimates that this bill would cost from a few $100,000 to over $1 million to regulate this law, plus to cover some negligible litigation fees arising from the law. Long story short, Proposition 37 would require manufacturers to put labels on all items that contain genetically engineered foods unless they qualify under one of the exceptions I mentioned earlier. The label would be similar to the Surgeon General's warning on alcohol or tobacco products, or like in health stores where the products have a label saying, "This product has not been evaluated by the FDA," and yada yada yada. Alright, so here's the yes side. You have a right to know what is in your food and whether your food is produced using genetic engineering. Protecting your family's health will be easier. You'll have the information you need about foods that some physicians and scientists say are linked to allergies and other significant health risks. We already have nutritional information on the labels. Now we can have information in plain language that lets us know if the food has been artificially altered in a laboratory using genes from viruses, bacteria, or other plants and animals. Because genetically engineered foods are controversial, over 40 countries around the world require labels for genetically engineered foods. There are no long-term studies that have proven that genetically engineered food is safe for humans. With conflicting, uncertain science about the health effects of genetically engineered foods, labeling is an important tool to protect your family's health. Prop 37 will be phased in, giving manufacturers time to print new labels telling you what's in your food or change their products if they no longer want to sell food produced using genetic engineering. They say Prop 37 doesn't raise food costs or taxes because food companies regularly reprint labels and there's a reasonable phase-in period. This won't raise prices. The FDA says providing more information to consumers about bioengineered food would be useful. Prop 37 prevents the misleading use of the word natural on products that are genetically engineered. Big food manufacturers and agrochemical companies and their lobbyists oppose this measure. Many of these are the same companies that lied to us about the effects of pesticides or fought to keep other information off of food labels, such as the number of calories or how much fat or salt is in their products. Now they want to keep us in the dark about the genetic engineering of our foods. The opponents of Prop 37 claim that enforcing this law would be a disaster. Enforcement is only an issue if companies disobey the law. Now for the no's. Prop 37's so-called right-to-know regulations are really a deceptive scheme full of absurd politically motivated special interest exemptions. For example, Prop 37 exempts milk, cheese, and meat from its labeling requirements. It exempts beer, wine, liquor, food sold at restaurants, and other foods containing genetically engineered ingredients. It exempts 2/3 of the food Californians consume, including products made by corporations funding the Prop 37 campaign. It requires special labels on soy milk, but exempts cow's milk and dairy products. Fruit juice requires a label, but alcohol is exempt. Pet foods containing meat require labels, but meats for human consumption are exempt. Foods imported from China and other foreign countries are also exempt if the sellers simply claim that their products are free of genetically engineered foods. Unscrupulous foreign companies could game the system. They say Prop 37 contains hidden costs for consumers and taxpayers. Studies show that by forcing many common food products to be repackaged or made with higher priced ingredients, Prop 37 could cost the average California family hundreds of dollars more per year for groceries. The official state fiscal impact analysis concludes that administering Prop 37's red tape and lawsuits would cost taxpayers millions. Even Prop 37's largest funder admits it would be an expensive logistical nightmare. It creates new shakedown lawsuits. Prop 37 was written by a trial lawyer who specializes in filing lawsuits against businesses. This allows lawyers to sue farmers, grocers, and food companies without any proof of violation or damage, raising food prices and tax costs for the legal proceedings. More than 400 scientific studies have shown that foods made with genetically engineered ingredients are safe. The American Medical Association says there is no scientific justification for the special labeling of bioengineered foods. Prop 37 isn't as simple as its promoters claim. It's a deceptive, deeply flawed food labeling scheme that would add more government bureaucracy and taxpayer costs, create new frivolous lawsuits, and increase food costs by billions without providing any health or safety benefits. And it's full of all those special interest exemptions. Genetic engineering has been used for nearly 2 decades to grow varieties of corn, soybeans, and other crops that resist disease and insects and require fewer pesticides. Thousands of common foods are made with ingredients from biotech crops. Prop 37 bans these perfectly safe foods in California unless they're specifically relabeled or remade with higher cost ingredients. So I'm not who you'd call a health freak, but I am somewhat interested in this topic, and I do my fair share of shopping at health food stores and organic type places and whatever. And so when I first started studying this proposition, I was like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. But I've since changed my view. I'm going to vote no on Prop 37 because, one, there isn't conclusive evidence that genetically engineered foods are a big deal, and we've been eating them for years and have yet to find any real verified harm. 2, even though I like the principle of knowing when a food is genetically engineered, the actual practice of enforcing it would be costly to everyone and detrimental to many. It would drive up costs for farms to stop using genetically engineered foods, and that cost would be passed on to consumers, and it would create yet even more California government bureaucracy and regulation to make sure that everyone is complying. It would cause great danger to many California farmers who will now have to try and keep up with more regulations that are no problem for Farmer John's or Vons or Whole Foods, but a big issue for a 6-member family operation. And not only will genetically engineered foods need to be relabeled, but stores will be required to justify foods that aren't labeled genetically engineered. Let me read this bit of the bill for you. For each product that is not labeled as genetically engineered, a retailer generally must be able to document why the product is exempt from labeling. There are 2 ways in which a retailer could document that a product is exempt. One, by obtaining a sworn statement from the provider of the product, such as a wholesaler, indicating that the product has not been intentionally or knowingly genetically engineered, or by receiving independent certification that the product does not contain genetically engineered ingredients. Other entities throughout the food supply chain, such as farmers and food manufacturers, may also be responsible for maintaining these records. This sounds like a mess. Does anyone really think that keeping track of all that for every food won't drive costs up? I believe it will. Plus, it isn't fair that many foods are randomly exempt while others aren't. The third reason I'm voting no on this is because if it's not sure that genetically engineered foods are a problem, forcing labels does add an unfair stigma to a food. Even if some lawmaker made a law that all apples had to be labeled if they'd been exposed to carbon dioxide, I can imagine someone in a grocery store, "Hey Gene, you see this? These apples have been exposed to carbon dioxide. I don't know about this. Let's just get the peaches instead." Of course, everything has been exposed to carbon dioxide, but labels just make everything scarier, and I think we need to be sure before we wreak havoc on someone's business. And 4, I think Prop 37 will put local farmers at a disadvantage when foreign merchants can just come in and say, "Nope, it's all natural, trust me," and then we just trust them. Finally, I think the provision allowing all those lawsuits will have lawyers all over farmers like flies on feces. More lawsuit abuse, more costs, higher prices. A yes vote on Prop 37 will require all grocers and farmers to label genetically engineered foods and maintain records of everything that isn't genetically engineered, and a no vote will keep everything the same. Again, I would really prefer to know if the food I'm eating has been genetically modified, but at this time I don't think the benefit is worth the consequences, so I'm voting no on Prop 37.